Welcome into another edition of Region Roundup. I'm James Boyd here with Mike Clark. After our 2-week layoff, I personally will have to apologize for that. Mike was ready. He was ready pretty much every day he asked, and then every day he asked, I was like, hey, Mike, I got a story. Hey, Mike, I got an interview. Hey, Mike, I got something else. So that is my fault. I have to prioritize the podcast more. I will do that going forward in the future. You have my word. I'm not a liar. So we're here again, Mike, and how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. We got a ton of stuff to talk about this week. As basketball, we're kind of putting basketball to bed, I guess, so to speak, with the All-Area and Player of the Year and Coach of the Year, and a lot of other stuff to talk about, recruiting news, Couts finishing second at state, but let's get into that for sure. Boys Basketball Player of the Year, Kamari Peterson, who winds up being on our cover 2 days in a row, actually, because the day after he was named the Player of the Year, he committed to Indiana State. And there's also some news for one of his teammates who is sticking around for a post-grad year. Krishan Christmas is going to Don Bosco Prep. And that's something that I don't even know that we have time to get into it today, but this is a massive issue across the entire country, basically, because with NCAA and NAIA and every other organization giving players that are currently there a free year, and then obviously we've had the D1 recruiting lockdown that's been going on forever and looks like it's going to go on for a while longer. Coaches can't get out to see players, and players can't go on official on-campus visits. So a lot of 2021s and 2022s are kind of caught in limbo here. But that's the news for Krishan. But Kamari, a lot of candidates here. And I know that you went through it pretty thoroughly and carefully, and Kamari was your man.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of factors that people don't factor in when they're just looking at their team or their son or their daughter or whatever. But I think that there's a couple of things you have to look at. One, how talented is the player? Like we already mentioned, he's going Division I. He's a talented player individually. Team success, they were a shot away from going to state. They helped he kind of led that rebuilding charge. Sure, he had a great teammate in Jalen Washington, another great teammate in Krishan Christmas and others. But I think when it came down to it, in the biggest games of the year, Westside played a really tough schedule. Kamari showed up. And then I was there at the semi-state game when he was in foul trouble early and still winded up with a team high, tied for the game high of 16 points. 6 of them in overtime, where he just took over down the stretch where nothing else was really working. I mean, they had some big plays from other players, but Jalen Washington, in his own words, laid an egg. And it got to the point where it was just like, give Kamari the ball and get out the way. And it was kind of, the Coach Bugs told me that in big moments, they trusted Kamari to either make the pass or make the shot or whatever. And I think when you factor in team success, individual abilities, big moments, the competition level, who you played, where you played. I mean, they played a lot of Indy area teams, and they only lost 5 games, one of them by double figures to Hammond. The other 4 were pretty close. So all that being said, to me, it was a pretty easy pick. Again, it's not who you think will be better in the future. It's not who you think will be better down the line or who you think will be the better college prospect. None of that. It's this year and who was the best player, and I think it was him. And I throw one more thing on there. It's not a career award. So I know we've had some players over the last 4 years who've done some amazing things, and just going through the all-area list myself, we have several players on here who are the all-time leading scorer at their school or in their county or whatever, but with all due respect, I don't care what you did last year or the year before that or the year before that. This is this year's Player of the Year. And Kamari Peterson had the best year all around, in my opinion, of any player in the region, and that's why he was named our Player of the Year. And, I'll go through the first team. as well. The other first teamers was his teammate, Jalen Washington, consensus 5-star prospect, Indiana Junior All-Star. And then we also had Christopher Mantis from Lowell, who's going to Appalachian State, one of the best scorers in the state. We had Harold Woods from Hammond, who was also, a really great player and part of the best team in the region in Hammond, and they were number 1 in the state for quite some time. And then rounding out that group was Cole Wireman from Couts, who some people might be like, he's 1A or whatever, but he took his team to state. And also, they played a tougher schedule this year. They played some tougher teams, and I can't think of any games where he just didn't show up. So he was a fantastic player. He's well respected. And one thing I'll say, I keep saying one thing, but I guess my really one last thing I'll say is that I've seen all these guys play. Like, out of all the names on here, we only have 30 players who were selected. We're not, gonna have a all-area list with 50 players, 60 players. I think that kind of dilutes the purpose. You want it to mean something. And so out of the 30 players on this list, I want to say I've seen 29 of them play in person in front of my eyes. And the other one, I think Britt Harris is the only one I didn't see play from Marquette. I've talked to him, I've interviewed him, and I've seen, what he's done as far as stats go against other, teams around the region. He was deserving of an honorable mention. So, not a perfect system at all. I have people that are upset at me, but, saying, Karan Davis should have been a first teamer. Well, it kind of depends on what you think matters the most. And again, it's not me just picking the 5 best or most talented players. I do have to factor in what you did as far as team success, your strength of schedule, what you did in big moments and things like that. And I think ultimately I have a list that is debatable, if you want to call it that, but also very respectable and one that I can take serious. And again, people love me, Mike, when I write about all their kids all year long, and then I come out with this list and, they don't see their son or daughter's name on this, on these 2 inches of paper, and all of a sudden I don't know what I'm talking about. So it was, I like it. It's fun.
Yeah, I have a few kind of a general all-area thoughts. First of all, I agree with you 100% on this is a this year award. And one of the things that a lot of writers, papers get caught up in, there are 2 things. Number one is, as you said, the career award thing. There were kids out there, seniors, who had tremendous 4-year careers, and I'm not going to name anybody because I don't want to leave anybody out. But, I mean, there are kids out there like that. And, that's one thing. Then there's another thing, and it didn't happen here, but one of the other pitfalls that people run into also is like, well, I'm not going to name this junior because he or she will have another chance next year. Well, you don't know that,
Right.
I mean, you could tear your ACL, and miss next year. So I always had a problem with that as well. But, and then thirdly, I guess I would say is that, we made a very deliberate decision to limit the number of players that we pick. And I think for the reason that you cited, it's the right decision. It needs to mean something to be all area. I mean,
Right.
There are other times, and, it wasn't like that. I will just say, there was kind of an idea that everybody we cover should have at least one kid on the team. Well, I don't agree with that. And we cover, 44, 45 high schools.
Yeah.
So that would put it at that, just if we had one kid from every school, let alone the fact that there are many schools that would, in that format, would deserve 2 or even 3 people on the team. So
Right.
Then you get up into 65, 70, and what does it mean? How much does it mean to be an all-area selection in that context?
Right. And then I think that, we have to factor in that there are certain things called like all conference. So, if you don't get the nod for all area, and you say, oh, I should have did this, like, I can't give it to everyone. It's all area. It's not all conference. And I'm sure a lot of people were recognized for the all conference awards and things like that. But again, I had to look at the totality of the season. It's not easy. I think people kind of take for granted. Like, you know, you're a lot of, like I said, a lot of coaches and parents and players, you're only seeing your team. You know, I'm putting miles on the car going to see everybody, you know, all week long. And oftentimes if there's like a tournament or something, I'd stay and watch the next, even if I didn't have to write about it, just to see, you know, the players. And I think, you know, again, not a perfect system. I tell people all the time, I wish it was like the NBA or like the Big Ten or something where you play the same level of competition, you play all the same opponents, and then you can go say, hey, okay, this is who's the best. I think it's easier that way. But it's hard when you're looking at, you know, class 1 through 4 and strength of schedule. And then also this year having COVID interruptions and things like that. It's not easy to determine that, but that's the fun of it too. I mean, that's why you put the list together. And again, 30 players. And I know, for example, we had Hammond. I had one from Hammond on the first team, 2 on the second team, 1 on the third team. People might be like, oh, that's too much. But Hammond, outside of Munster, I think there was like a 2-point win. They gave it to every single region team, and they were number 1 in the state. And they also went 18-2 with their 2 losses being a 1-point loss to the Class 4A runner-up, and then an overtime loss to you know, a team in the regional final. So again, you can debate with me or beat me. I'm like, hey, if you want to be considered, you know, all area, play the best people. I think that's the easiest thing I'll say is like a message to coaches, teams, what. Play the best people. Like, play the best, you know.
Absolutely.
And do
absolutely. That. And we should mention Hammond's Larry Moore Jr., repeat Coach of the Year, deservedly so. We've talked on the pod before. I go back to covering Larry in high school along with his brothers, actually, as well. And his dad, Larry Sr., coaching at St. Francis de Sales in Chicago, now the retiring AD at Hammond High. You know, what a tremendous story this was. You know, it's the last year of Hammond High as we know it. The new school is next door. It's going to be Hammond Central. And, you know, I mean, it's a no-brainer that Larry gets that job. I mean, clearly.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
When I interviewed him for the story, Mike, it was funny, you know, because he can't say, you know, officially or for certain he's the coach, but you know, he kind of laughed it off when I asked if he'd be the coach. And, you know, that's the expectation. If he's not, I'm saying this now, you will see a scathing column from me. No, I'm joking. That won't happen. He's going to be the coach. But yeah, it was hard not to pick him. I mean, I was looking at other coaches who've had great years. And, I mean, you had a team go to state. And then you had, you know, Bowman's coach, Tyron Robinson, repeat as a sectional champion with basically only 1 starter returning. But when you look at the totality of the season, Hammond was top dog in the region, one of the top dogs in the state, and they nearly won the regional without their starting, you know, 4-year point guard. So, I mean, you factor all that in, and he's the coach of the year, second time. I think I was looking through our list. It might be the first time ever we had back-to-back coaches of the year. But, again, I can't see the future. Didn't know the season was going to be like this. I wouldn't go back and change anything about last year. So that is what it is. And I think people know, and he's widely respected as one of the better coaches in the state. So I'm excited for his future, and that kind of rounds out like my all-area boys. And then for girls, it was a little bit easier. I won't lie. I don't think anybody could debate that Jessica Carruthers wasn't our player of the year, Mike. I mean, you saw the numbers. You've seen her the last few years, what she's done for the region. She's kind of entering that rarefied air as far as one of the greatest girls basketball players, just basketball players in general, region history. So she was our player of the year on the girls' side. Our coach of the year was actually Tony Shub from Andran. I know that some people were upset about that, saying it should have been Chris Seibert from Crown Point. However, I'd like to point out, and no disrespect to Chris Seibert at all, and Mike, you know, we talk about this all the time, Crown Point was expected to be a state champion. They came into the year as, I believe, favored to win state. So they did what they were supposed to do. I'm not taking anything away from it. I don't want to take it for granted. They're a great team. However, I don't think anybody expected Andran to, one, go 18-2, starts off 16-0, and then also go toe-to-toe with Crown Point and have a chance to win it. So, and one of the I think the biggest reason, even beyond the Crown Point game, is the reason why I gave Andran's coach the nod, is that unlike other schools in the region like Crown Point, where you were able to opt out of being, you know, of in-school learning, So, like, for example, the entire Crown Point girls basketball team didn't do, like, in-person learning. They did it all virtual. They just met up as a team and had practice. So they were able to basically stay away from potential contact tracing and things like that. And Drain's students didn't have that option. So they were all in class. And more or less, if a person tested positive in your class, then you were contact tracing, you couldn't play. So they were constantly dealing with different lineups early in the year and still finding ways to win and beat, good teams. I mean, their best player, Julia Schutz, their all-time leading scorer, she actually missed part of the season because she tested positive for COVID-19. And they were still winning. So I think that you have to factor in, like, what it takes as a coach to be able to juggle so many lineups, so many different personnels, and be able to still win and play at a high level. And again, they played Crown Point better than any other team in the state except for Silver Creek, who beat them, and Silver Creek won the 3A title. So I think that deserves credit. I mean, they held off Courtney Blakely at 55 against them. I mean, and they were doing things that hadn't been done in a while at that school. Kind of fizzled out in the regional, but again, I thought he did a great job coaching. And I guess I want to remind you that it's not an automatic, if a team goes to state or wins state, that's the coach of the year. That's not always the case. I mean, yes, Seibert is a fantastic coach. He also had the most talented group of players in the region and in the state, arguably. So there you have it.
Absolutely. And that's a good point. And that's kind of what people need to understand, too. Again, like we were saying, before with the player of the year, it's who had the best year this year, in terms of, expectations from beginning to end. And, I've had this discussion here at the Times many times over the years where somebody would say, well, this coach, went to the semi-state, nobody else got past the regional, so therefore they're automatically the coach of the year. No. Doesn't work that way. I mean, we've picked coaches who got to like the sectional championship game just because they had such a tremendous turnaround. I mean, in football, I made some strong arguments for coaches that, were something like 1-8 and turned around and, had winning seasons or something like that, got to like the sectional championships. So I think that's what you have to look at, who did the best coaching job this year. It's not who's the best coach, it's who did the best coaching job this year, and I respect your choice. And let's get on the rest of the all first team. We should mention them too, as we did for the boys.
So it's Jessica Carruthers, Lily Stoddard, her teammate, Trinity Thompson, Ryan Ott. She's going to Purdue Fort Wayne. Trinity Thompson is going to Northern Kentucky. And then Courtney Blakely, the state's leading scorer, which segues into our next point. She is headed to Middle Tennessee State. She committed this past Friday. I went to her house and got a chance to meet not meet her family. I know her family actually pretty well. But I guess meet more of her family. They're basically saying like, oh, I'm not surprised that you showed up. And I was like, you know what? I got to show up for Courtney because I've written about her so much. And, it wasn't too far from the office anyways. It was a pretty quick story. I mean, I've written about the girl so much I could probably tell you her stats off the top of my head, to be honest. But she's I'm glad for her because one of the things I put in the story, I don't know if you read it, but those of you can check it out. She actually thought about quitting basketball last year, like legitimately quitting basketball. And I was like, wait, what? Like, who tells you this on the day they're committing? So I was like, wait, what do you mean quitting? Like, you were great last year and you were, a superstar this year. And she was like, yeah, but I wasn't getting any looks. Everyone kept telling me I was too short and I wasn't really getting any attention. And, coaches would contact me, then it would fall out. And long story short, she's just relieved to have a chance to keep playing in college at a Division I program. And I think that she's a good fit for that program. I believe they made the NCAA tournament this past year. And I think that more than anything, Courtney was just one of those players, more than some others, that was hurt by not having that last year of AAU basketball, that exposure, things like that, because once the pandemic hit, she said her recruitment really slowed down. And I think a lot of coaches were contemplating, this is speculation, but I guess, you can take it with whatever mindset you want. But I think that a lot of coaches, in my opinion, may have wanted to see, like, if it was a fluke, like what she was doing, the scoring and things like that. Is it real? Like, can she really do it? And, she was. I mean, she put up great numbers against pretty much every single team she played, and had 2 50-point games. Number 16 all-time leading scorer in girls basketball history in Indiana. The list goes on and on. Indiana All-Star. So she's headed to Middle Tennessee State. Is going to have a great career there. Didn't get a chance to visit because of COVID, but I'm sure that she'll be just fine. She's one of those kids, Mike. Like, you don't worry about her as far as staying out of trouble, getting the grades, none of that. Like, it just comes down to what she can do to hopefully get on the court as soon as possible. So she's going to Middle Tennessee. And then, like you mentioned, it was a big weekend, Mike. We had Kamari Peterson commit to Indiana State shortly thereafter, a couple days after on Sunday. I joked with him. I was like, man, you got me working on the Sunday. I don't do this, for anybody. And he was joking with me. And when I called him, Mike, and he answered, I said, you knew this call was coming. He just laughed. He committed after the Hoosier Basketball Magazine workout in Indianapolis. And actually, Indiana State was the last school to offer him a scholarship. They offered him a scholarship almost last week to this day. I think they offered him last Tuesday. So he said that they needed a point guard and trust that he can be that point guard for the future. So I'm happy for him as well. He's another one that kind of suffered from not having that AAU exposure, but I think he's happy with his decision. And again, free education, 4-year university, Division I basketball. One thing I like to just point out to people, whenever I do these commitment stories, there's always people that comment and say, well, how come they didn't go to IU? How come they didn't go to Purdue? How come they didn't go to Notre Dame? And it's like, just be happy that they have a chance to play. I'm sure these kids weighed their options and, whatever schools were available to them, they looked into them and then they chose their school. But please, I'm sick of the, Purdue, IU, YU. I'm like, every kid is not going to get an offer from those schools. And two, even if they do get an offer from those schools, not every kid is going to go there. I mean, that's just the bottom line. Let it go. I saw a comment the other day. People were complaining about, they were commenting on the Courtney Blakely story and saying like, well, this could be a situation where, Dana Evans was kind of overlooked in the same way. And look what happened to her. And I'm like, well, look what happened to her. She went to Louisville and had a great career. So, people kind of lose sight of it's free education to do the sports that you love. So be happy about it. And, make sure you just uplift these kids rather than tell them, I'm happy for you, but no, keep the butt. Just be happy.
And, so moving on, the last game of the year was Couts playing in the state championship game. Keith Newst got to score his state championship game after 53 years of being Couts scorekeeper.
Yeah.
That was one of the cool stories. There were a lot of cool stories, and now the basketball season is over.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing we're waiting on, at least I'm waiting on, is the Indiana All-Stars list for boys, that is. I do think that Kamari Peterson might have an outside chance to get on that team. We'll see. But I'm excited just for that to come out. I'm excited for Mr. Basketball to come out. We don't have anybody from the region who was a finalist, but I just like to see who it is and things like that. But as far as me and like my basketball games and things like that, I mean, I don't know if I'll be going to like the Indiana All-Star games or anything like that. However, the season is officially over. Mike, I was a little sad leaving Banker's Life, which I'll tell you, it was so the plan was for me to go cover the 1A game, knock out my stories, and leave. But you know me, the basketball junkie, I was like, you know what, James? Like, you don't know next time you're going to be here. So you might as well just stay. So I was there for the, 9 a.m. region time, 10 a.m. Eastern time game for Couts. Did that game story. Kevin Duzan called Cole Wireman the best player ever at the school. It's debatable. You got Ricky Haas and a few others that were great as well. But he said it, not me. And I did a story on that. And did a story on Keith. Keith actually emailed me, Mike. It was after midnight one of these days. He told me he liked the story and appreciated the words that I wrote about him, and said he likes to stay behind the scenes but enjoyed, I guess, getting a little recognition for what he does. So that was cool. And then I just stuck around. I mean, I finished up all my stories right when the 3A game was about to start. And then I was like, you know what? Like, I'm staying. So I stayed, and I watched that game. It was close. Then I stayed for the 4A game, which was also close, went to overtime. And then as I was watching that game, I was like, snapping my head back and forth between the game right in front of me on the court at Bankers Life Fieldhouse and the TV right next to me that was showing the UCLA and Gonzaga game. So after the 4A game finished, Mike, I actually stayed even longer to watch the end of the Final Four game between UCLA and Gonzaga. And I almost, I had to make sure I kept my professionalism because I was ready to scream when Jalen Suggs hit that shot. But I think they were doing like Zoom interviews for like the post game. It was funny. I think that one of the things that I was kind of thankful for is that I wasn't an Indy area writer, Mike, so I didn't have to choose between like listening to like the Zoom call from like the coaches that just won state or just finished as a runner up and watching the end of the UCLA Gonzaga game, because I mean it was funny. The reporters were like waiting for like the people to get on their Zoom calls, and they were like calling over like the banister where I was standing and said, "T, what's the score? Who's got the ball?" And, so it was like that perfect mix of like being like a sports reporter, also a sports fan. So it was awesome. I feel like if I had a chance, Mike, I would have drove right down the street to Lucas Oil to watch that game. It was great. It was a great weekend. Big shout out to Couts. I loved covering them throughout the playoffs because I don't think any other school will have that type of feel, that type of vibe to it, just because it was truly a small town Hoosier-esque run. I mean, all the stories I wrote a story about one of their assistant coaches being a farmer, and his family,
Yes.
Moving over, years and years ago and buying land there and still living in the same house as his grandparents. And, so it was a fun time, and I enjoyed it. And I'm sure, that I enjoyed it. And I think we all did. I mean, it was one of those things where, like you said, Keith Newst, I think, was one of the biggest pieces about this whole run is like everyone was happy for Keith. The players, the coaches, the fans, the administration, everyone was so happy for him because he's been there. Good, bad, ugly, never missed a game, 53 years. And like I said in my column, man, I think he has it figured out. You do what you love for as long as you can, and you hope that you can continue to do it. And I'm excited to hopefully see Keith again this spring for baseball, and hopefully, again in next year for basketball, because he's not riding off into the sunset. He doesn't care if Cal goes undefeated or winless. He will be there, and like he says, to watch them work their fannies off. So I hadn't heard the word fannies ever, I don't think, Mike. So that was it.
That's the thing too, because that is the way it works. For Keith, it's like because he's already, you've seen it pop into your email. He's sending us baseball and softball boxes now too. It's like, he's not a bandwagon guy.
No.
He is there, from beginning to end, and it's a wonderful story. One more bit of basketball news. Lighthouse has a new coach. Who's a guy who's been around Lighthouse for a while, I guess.
Yes, Thomas Smith is returning to Lighthouse. That's where he actually started his head coaching career. He's been the Lighthouse girls coach, boys coach. He was also the girls coach at Bowman. Helped out on the boys side as well at Bowman. He's a Horace Mann grad, 1992. Loves Gary. He's a firefighter for the city. Told me he doesn't want to ever leave the city, and he's excited. I believe Lighthouse is returning all, if not maybe one player graduate. I believe they're returning their entire team for next year, so he's excited about the opportunity. We all know what happened with Nick Moore being fired after throwing a chair, and then Kendall Nichols stepped in as the interim coach for the last 4 games of the season and things like that. So Lighthouse has been a little bit of a whirlwind the last few years, but Smith is hoping to be like that coach for now and the future, so they have some stability going forward. I'll have more on that in a story later today. Stay tuned for that. And then we'll also move on to Illinois. I know, Mike, you've had some you've written some really nice pieces, by the way. I'm a fan of yours. But yeah, how much fun has it been to just be, I guess, more in a rhythm now with multiple teams playing? I know you're always heading to games, and Illinois actually plays on like a different type of schedule than Indiana. So there's, different days for games and competition as opposed to Indiana, which is really, I guess, a little more rigid, I would say, for their scheduling.
Right. So we're in football season now. We're starting week 5 out of a 6-week season, no playoffs. Last week, one of our 3 teams, TF North, was in a COVID pause, and it was kind of a crazy story because it was not anything to do with TF North, but the week before that, a week ago last Friday, they played Lamont, And they found out the next day that one of the officials who worked that game tested positive the next day. So TF North and Lamont went into quarantine, again, not through anything that they did. So they missed a game last week. And actually, I guess, thinking about the fact that we haven't talked about this for 2 weeks now, because we didn't have a pod last week, but I got a chance to see Marian Catholic a week ago last Thursday, play at DePaul Prep, which is up in the city. Brand new football stadium. Actually, the first game they've ever played in that stadium, which was kind of cool. But Marian Catholic, I think we talked about this, just, a whirlwind. We talked about a whirlwind for Lighthouse. It's been a whirlwind for Marian Catholic. Justin Young, who was a player who had been in the program, he was not on the team this year, but he was still a senior at the school, died in a car crash 2 days before their season opener. The players had an option of not to play. Basically, the school asked him, do you want to play this game or not? And the players said, we do want to play. Tajim Lawson, who is their best player, he's a running back who's going to be a preferred walk-on at Northern Illinois, talked to me a little bit about playing for Justin after the DePaul Prep game. Marian Catholic won that game. It was their first win of the season. A very emotional night, very cold night also. That was 2 weeks ago. I don't know if anyone recalls, but that Thursday night it got down to like 25 degrees. So it was like, we were all kind of hoping, playing football in the spring, the weather wouldn't be quite like that, but there you go. And then last week I saw TF South move to 3-1, and this week we have the biggest game on the Illinois side, pretty much in any sport. It's TF South, TF North. They call it the Battle of Burnham as opposed to the Battle of Broadway for Andrean and Merrillville. But, two schools separated by about 3 miles on Burnham Avenue. And that'll be a fun one, too. That'll be Saturday afternoon. Actually, TF North got an extra day to prepare because they're actually not back in practice out of the quarantine until tomorrow, which would be Tuesday as we're speaking right now. And also covering a little bit of basketball myself. Well, actually not a game, but South Suburban College over in South Holland was playing in the regional tournament. They're NJCAA Division II, won the regional. Deshaundre Washington had kind of an interesting story, and we're pretty deep into this podcast, and I'll try to keep it kind of short. But he had an interesting story. So he played at Morgan Park with Ayo Dosunmu and Adam Miller, who any basketball fan is pretty much aware of. Ayo won the award for the best point guard in the country, the Cousy Award. He's going to the NBA. Adam Miller had started every game for Illinois as a freshman. He's actually gone into the transfer portal, but those two players plus Deshaundre won a state title in Illinois at Morgan Park. Deshaundre then went to play D1 basketball at Robert Morris, which is in Pittsburgh, but didn't quite work out. He had some family tragedy. 2 of his uncles passed away. His little sister, who was 4 years old, passed away. And he just felt like he really needed to not be away from his family at that point. So he came back, played 1 game for Robert Morris, got a hardship exemption, came to South Suburban, and he's the best Division II JUCO player in the country. He's leading the country in scoring, leading the country in rebounds, top 5 in assists and top 5 in blocks and steals, and top 25 in assists. So obviously a pretty well-rounded game. He's an intriguing prospect because he's 6'7", so he's super long, super fast. I don't know where he projects as when he goes back to D1, because he will go back to D1. I guess, when you're 6'7" and you've got those kind of shooting skills, maybe you're a big 3 I guess, probably. Or maybe an average size 3, I suppose, at 6'7". But they're going to nationals next week now. They qualified for nationals last year. Wasn't played because of COVID, but kind of a cool story there. And one more story I'm going to pitch. It's actually going to be in tomorrow's paper. Again, we're recording this on Monday, so it'll be in Tuesday's paper. Bill Brick, who a lot of the baseball folks around the region are familiar with. He was a guy who grew up in South Chicago, and he lived in Dalton for a while. Was an all-state pitcher at Thornridge, but he's best known for being a scout for 3 different MLB teams: the Pirates, the Padres, and the D-backs. He passed away at 70 last week, and at the time of his death, he was still working as a special assistant to the general manager, the D-backs, one of the most respected scouts in the country. I talked to his cousin, who was his best friend growing up, which is kind of a cool story too. But and this is kind of I was kind of doing some research and looking back through our files a little bit too. One of the cool things is that even as he was traveling the country as a scout, he was also doing a ton of camps and clinics around here, and we have a lot of photos in our archives of him showing kids how to grip a curveball or how to hit or something like that. So I thought that was kind of cool that he didn't really forget about the kids in his backyard, as well as all of these major leaguers that he wound up scouting and and developing. So you also have an obit that you were able to prepare as well for another person who had been really a part of the region sports scene for a long time.
Yeah, Luann Hobson, the longtime Chesterton softball coach, who helped start the program over 30 years ago. She passed over the weekend. I spoke to their former Chesterton AD, one of her former players who became a coach, and I'll have more on that as well. Hoping to talk to a few more people today before I follow that story. But from what I understand, she was like the hard-nosed, fiery coach who didn't take anything from anybody. And I kind of like hearing the stories from the people I spoke to about how she was just no nonsense, kind of like the tough love type of coach. And from what I understand, a lot of people appreciated what she did, only for Chesterton, but for girls and women's sports. And personally, I think it should be called women's sports, honestly, at this point. But women's sports in Indiana, as far as just pushing for more opportunities for women in high school sports in Indiana. So I'll have more on that. I'll rely on the people who knew her to talk about her, frankly. I mean, I'm only 25. I did not have a chance to meet Coach Hobson. So I'll let those who knew her, met her, loved her, basically drive that story. So yeah, that basically wraps up for this week. Went a little longer. I'm sorry. Like I said, I was in a very unique place the last few weeks trying to get a bunch of stuff done. But I appreciate it. I appreciate all the support, as always. I'm sure Mike does as well. Make sure you to subscribe to our paper. Continue to support local journalism. Continue to wear your mask and mask up and get your shots as well. I believe, Mike, did you get your first shot, or are you scheduled?
I did, indeed.
There we go.
Last Wednesday. And let me give a plug to the FEMA site at the Merrillville Community Center, 6600 Broadway in Merrillville. Super efficient. I was in and out before my actual appointment time. I got there a little bit early because I wasn't sure, what the protocol was. But, they register you. They give you the little card that we've seen, in every Twitter and Instagram and Facebook post. There you go. But, yeah, and went in, got the shot. You sit for 15 minutes. For those of you who haven't had it, you sit for 15 minutes. They make sure that there's no immediate side effects. They let you go. I did not have any. I had a little bit of arm soreness, nothing serious. I slept for 9.5 hours that night, which was awesome. And, so yeah, I'm a little bit more than 2 weeks away from my second shot. Can't wait. Folks, please consider getting vaccinated. Please keep wearing the mask. Please keep social distancing. We've seen some upticks in some certain areas. We don't want to go backwards. And, we want to have a full spring season, which we did not get last year. We want to roll right into the summer, with camps and AAU and oilmen and rail cats, and then get back to football in the fall. So let's do all the things that we need to do to make that happen. And I think that's all I have. So we will talk to you again next week. Thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for supporting local journalism.